Holy crap. I never thought a 50-year-old piece of camera equipment would engender such a turnout. This is fantastic. On behalf of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, I'd like to welcome you to the Steven Spielberg Gallery at Steven Spielberg Family Gallery at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. I think, don't touch the bottle. Oh. 10 seconds in and we're off the rails. My name is Chico Ziki. I am an Academy member. This here is Les Bernstein. He is also an Academy member. He is a trained professional motion control operator. I'm just seeing so many people here. Welcome. We are so proud to be able to present the Deisterflex and the gentleman that worked on it and the effects for Star Wars to you today. This piece of equipment, it looks like a hunk of junk, just like the Millennium Falcon, but it's not. This camera system is very important to us in the visual effects field because, quite frankly, it not only revolutionized the way visual effects were done, it revolutionized the way films were made. It allowed a whole new generation of filmmakers to tell their stories. Just to sort of get into the demo of this, back in the early days, going back to the 50s, 60s, 30s, 40s, if you wanted to do some visual effects or you wanted to film some spaceships or airplanes, you would walk into a stage much like this, and you would have a model. There would be some track in the ceiling. There would be a model hanging from wires. There would be a camera on a very large tripod here. This room would be filled with lights. It would be very hot. At some point, someone would say, okay, we're ready. Someone would go and they would light the sparklers on the back of the spaceship, and someone would call action. The spaceship would fly. It would wobble down the track, and the sparklers would fall down, and the smoke would go up, and they would say, cut, and they would go, wow, that's great. And it was. For a long time, that was great. If you watch any of the Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers serials of the 30s and 40s, there's a certain charm, even today, in how that was done. But that wasn't what George Lucas wanted. George Lucas wanted something a lot more realistic. The audiences were a lot more sophisticated, and he also had a background in documentary filmmaking. We had seen all this World War II combat footage that was referenced for Star Wars. We had seen Vietnam on the nightly news, and he knew that in order to sell the believability of Star Wars, the effects had to be such that the audience wasn't pulled out going, oh, that's a crappy model, oh, that's wobbling, or I can see the wires, or anything like that. We wanted people to think about the visual effects long after they left the theater. And so that posed quite a challenge to the visual effects professionals that he gathered to do this. I want to impress upon everyone here today that this system is a system. It's different components within the Deisterflex, it's different components within visual effects, within the actual process of putting the visual effects together. And it was revolutionary. It changed the way films were made. It certainly changed how studios approach visual effects movies based on the box office success of Star Wars. But it's also evolutionary. This was not created out of the vacuum. This was a progression. And the gentlemen that you're going to hear talk today all have very diverse backgrounds, and they all approach this problem, this challenge, let's say, by using different things that they had experienced in their past and on past projects in order to bring all of that knowledge to bear and create a team to develop this. I'm going to start by asking John Dykstra to talk a little bit about some of the initial concerns and the initial discussions that you had with George and Gary about you're going to need to build a new camera system. You're not going to be able to use the existing technology to get what you want. How did that conversation go down?
Well, the foundation is pretty much what you talked about.
Is that audio sufficient, everybody?
No, I can't tell because I'm deaf.
How's that? How's that? Try
Now
that.
my cheat is in, no. All right, so pretty much what you outlined, the traditional effects techniques were tedious and the results were questionable. If you photographed the model real time, you ended up with the motion blur rate that is appropriate to a model. If you photographed the model stop motion, you ended up with individual sharp frames which tended to stutter when you played it back. So we wanted to do something that would give us the former, but with the flexibility and control of the latter, meaning stop motion allows you to control individual axes and movement of model as separate issues and to be able to repeat them. We wanted to be able to get that repeatability, but we also wanted to include the continuous motion that is incumbent upon things that are moving fast. So when the camera pans or when the ship goes by, each frame has a little bit of blur. Motion blur is what it's called. And it's what gives you the impression of speed. And it also makes it look like what it would be if you actually go take a film camera and photograph somebody in space doing that.
And it also gives you a good sense of scale. This does not look like a 20-inch spaceship. It looks like a 40-foot.
Motion blur didn't really do that.
Okay.
You're wrong, Gene.
Okay.
So before you no, so anyway, the motion blur was a motion artifact, not so much a scale artifact. The scale issue had to do with keeping the entire image in focus because a full-size object, I'm not going to get into that, that's too far into the weeds. But basically what it required was that the front end of the plane be in sharp focus and the back end of the plane would be in sharp focus, as it would be if you were to photograph a plane, full-size plane, in that kind of a light environment. So a great deal of work went into capabilities on the camera and lighting and motion control capabilities to allow us to run at a very low speed, which meant that we could use a very small aperture, which resulted in a depth of field, meaning the depth of space in front of the camera that was in focus was increased. So that wouldn't be unusual for it to be a second and a half per frame exposure. And with a pull down of a second and a half, we were at 180 degrees shutter. That means 3 seconds per frame. So you can imagine how long it takes to photograph something.
So Les, why don't you start running? We'll give you an example of how fast this would run.
So this is going 4 frames a second.
So everyone hold your breath while we film this shot and you'll all pass out. So what you're seeing here, what is causing this to move are these blue motors. There's one spinning there, one down there. In this model mover, there's one on the camera as well, although it's painted black. And these motors are not your normal motors that you just apply current to and it goes faster or slower depending on the load. These are stepper motors. This is something more akin to what you would find on an industrial machine or an industrial robot. They're very precise. They're spinning very quickly, relatively quickly now, but they are actually getting little pulses of electricity from our computer over there and the drivers that are underneath that will hopefully not blow up. They will get a little pulse of electricity and they'll turn just a fraction of a rotation on the axle. Maybe, let's say it's 100 steps to make one complete revolution. And maybe that one revolution will move it 1 inch. Well, you need a lot of pulses. You need 6,280 pulses to move it down the length of the track, if that's accurate. But these motors are repeatable because if you move it 6,280 steps that way, and then move it 6,280 steps that way, theoretically, it's moved back to the exact same place. And that allows them to do repeatability. Now, The repeatability was important, Richard, for what reasons? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the things that you needed it to repeat?
Well, we needed to, if we wanted, if we had running lights or something like that, they have to be done on a separate path. But in fact, what we did, what I would do in the program the shot would be walk along the track, looking through a reflex unit tube, and program each axis once at a time. In other words, the track would be one axis, the boom moving up and down to the other axis, and the panning built in the rotate the other axis. And that's on the camera. So there's also a reverse. Then the model would have the cylinders. So each one of these axes had to be programmed separately. And I also had to think at 1/24 to 50 speed. I'm programming this in very slow motion. And so that was something that I had to learn in programming shots. For example, the X-ray.
Well, hang on just a second. So just, even though that this camera is moving really slow, and it's going at 4 frames per second, or a frame and a half per second. Yeah, it's really slow. When it's played back at 24 frames per second, it's going to feel a lot faster. It's going to feel like you're speeding towards, in this case, the Millennium Falcon. So in here, this is a custom-built VistaVision camera. If you go upstairs and you look at the Godfather exhibit, you should definitely do that after we're done here, you'll notice two things. One, it's a big, huge camera. It's sitting on a tripod. There's no way you can get close to the model with the big tripod that's there. And also, the film in that camera travels top to bottom. And so even though the film is standard 35 millimeter film, it's really only going to be about an inch wide. The VistaVision travels left to right, and so it gives it a more image area, which is the equivalent these days of going from your cell phone, the little sensor that's in your cell phone, to someone's probably got a DSLR here that's got a much bigger image sensor, so that gives you a higher quality image. Why is that important? Because after Richard and Doug are done filming the models, that has to go to optical. And then they have to combine it with other spaceships and other starfields and laser blasts and all sorts of stuff like that. And that image quality degrades over time. And so starting off with a higher...
No, we only did one tube. In other words, all the models were shot against blue screen. They were duplicated one time only for a composite. We didn't double duplicate.
Then double duplicate? Okay. Well, again, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I can lie. I know.
That's two.
Yeah. How do you lie? Yeah. Anyway, look, since I'm going to get this wrong, what this is called is the Trojan head, simply because it was resembled the helmets that Trojan warriors or Roman soldiers would wear. But by hanging the camera from the top, from the crane, it allowed them to get in closer to the model. So when you were filming the Star Destroyer,
but also you have to keep in mind that in miniature photography, the infinite pupil of the lens has to be on the same axis as the pan, tilt, and roll. If it's not, it doesn't look right. In other words, if you have the camera, if the lens is out here and you're panning like that, you're not really panning, you're sweeping. So when you're panning like this, you're mimicking a miniature camera. And this camera basically can tilt to shoot straight down or to shoot about 30 degrees up. And so we have a great deal of flexibility with this system. And it enables the camera to get very close I mean, the next one is flying back like this, sometimes on a football. With the model, we have to call the house on this. But,
We're hoping not to crash into the wall
this
here
was a
today.
very flexible camera
So, Gene?
Yeah.
and service. well.
In keeping with this, just because one of the things that's important here is we talked about repeatability. One of the reasons we need the repeatability, the precision with which the electronic device keeps track of the motion of the camera, is because the shots are made up of many elements. And as Richie pointed out, sometimes it'd be light sources on the models, and in other cases, we'd be adding models to elements of other models to a shot that already included one. So the duplication of the camera room was essential to making sure that all the things stayed in position relative to one another. That's why the ability to record and reproduce accurately was so important. And the reference to me is more like the concept of a multi-track audio recording. You basically can run the tape, you can record one channel, you can play that channel back, record a second, and so forth. And that's basically what the digital system did. And that's was critical to being able to make those multiple passes, not only because we wanted to add chips, but we wanted to vary the exposure. So you want to make a simple definition of what...
But basically, one of the main reasons we wanted to be able to repeat the production, I mean, repeat the move, was so I could shoot a black and white test. Once I finished programming the shot, I had to do a black and white shot of it, which would be then developed in a little closet next to the stage in a little CoStar developer. And then 10 minutes later, the fellow would bring it out to me. I could look at it on a viewer, 12-inch wide viewer, and see how I like to move. And then I could then save that tape that I just did, the black and white of that, do the next model, maybe flying in conjunction with the first one, and then I could then shoot that one, and then we bypass those in the viewer and look and see how they worked against each other. So the repeatability was crucial to getting the shot right. And once I got a shot that I liked in the black and white, I would shoot it against blue screen and then move on to the next element. So we had to do that about 5 times a day, and each setup was complicated. And once you got that shot, you had to break it down and put everything aside, get ready for the next take, set it up, and then shoot the next part.
Cool. So all of these stepper motors are controlled by a device much like what we have here. This one is called the Icebox. This is actually developed for close encounters. Unfortunately, the electronic equipment for the original Dexterflex did not survive, but the one that was built for the Dexterflex actually is from the same period. We're lucky to have it here, on display. If we were to open up the back of it, and it's not really that convenient to do that, you would see that inside it's got a whole bunch of these circuit boards and capacitors that look like this. This is will look relatively Gilligan's Island-ish in comparison to what's inside your iPhones and digital watches. But you'll also notice that the entire thing is all hand-wrapped with very thin wires on brass posts. This was rather meticulous to pull off, and the storage on this, I don't even want to call it a disc, I don't know what to call it, has about as much storage capacity as my watch, and both Les and I are wearing Timexes. There is no storage capacity. And the guy who did all of this is Al Miller. This idea of having to call it a computer is probably a misnomer, because it's not really much of a computer. It's more like digital storage and digital memory.
Yeah, true. In fact, saying it has as much memory as your watch is way overstating.
Okay, so I'm wrong the third time.
One of the reasons we were able to do this for Star Wars in the first place, one had to do with was that technology had sort of caught up to giving us the tools, the pieces that we could do this. And one of the main things was memory. But your watch, you go get a digital watch now, I guarantee it has a whole lot more than 8K worth of memory in it, which is what these have. When we built the first motion control for Star Wars, we were able to get 1K by 1 memory at about $20 a piece. And then by the time we built the second one, those were obsolete, and we were getting buying them cheap, 1K by 1 for a buck a piece. And from then on, it was ridiculous to do it in our own building, our own memory. We were able to go to small computers like that to use that one first. And now there's now. Yeah. Exactly.
Now, you started working on this type of technology, not just on Star Wars, but a little bit before that when you were doing some work at Berkeley, and I believe, John, you were involved in that as well.
Not what he was doing.
Okay.
I was working in the lab that Alan J. was working on, and he was also working on some other process at the university. So. Yeah, I was working at the university, quite called the fog chamber, and sort of the first motion control that we built was there. It was a pretty odd one. We had stepping motors we were using, and we could repeat, but the memory for it, I'm not sure it was so much memory. You program a move, and you send that move up to the RAD lab, and they do a punch paper tape. And we put that in the machine, and the punch paper tape would tell the motor what to do. And then for where I met John on campus with a project, very similar motion control to this, a 100-scale model of ran with a program, now a PDP-8 computer that would do this, but with a room-size computer, and that could actually be programmed in place. But there wasn't the parts available to actually do a motion control sort of down at this scale.
So, John, how was it talking to? There's a lot of stuff here that's going over my head, obviously. How was it trying to explain to George Lucas and Gary Kurtz that this is what you need, and that you're going to be developing technology as opposed to just making a movie?
You step back and you say, when Wedge attacks Porkins, they're going to do this kind of move, and it's going to haul ass right on the camera like that. And that's really all you got to say.
Except that your role, the Wedge did not attack Porkins.
I know, they were all the same people. But it was friendly fire.
Yeah.
I know.
But did they understand it? I mean,
I don't think they needed to understand.
All you needed to do is show them a shot. And if you like the shot, you move on to the next one. So that's how it started.
No, but I'm talking about the early days.
When we should do this. I think it's a concept. Yeah, the idea was, and listen, I was a good salesman. I went in and I convinced him that I had the components in terms of my ideas that would be essential to making this happen. Didn't know how it was going to be executed and didn't know the specifics because that was going to be the team that was generated to actually build it. But the idea was there. We were going to make an all-purpose camera that was specifically designed for application in adventures. And then all of the concepts in terms of repeatability, recordability, multi-track playback, and recording were all things that hadn't been combined in a single system before. So it was the marriage of different concepts into a single system, the whatever, the maturity of that system in terms of what technology was available, and the skills and brilliance and collaboration of all of the individuals who were responsible for putting that together and putting it into use. So it was kind of a sales pitch, but again, I guess the concept is sort of like building the airplane while you're flying from Miami to LA. So we set out on the journey assuming that we were going to fly at 30,000 feet, and we was going to be flying. And after the first meal service, we found out that there were some problems that we were going to have to solve. But because of the adaptability of the individuals and their enthusiasm for the doing of the work, those changes were made on a timely basis and we continued forward. So it's, and I'm afraid that it's the individuals who contributed to it that made the whole greater than the sum of its parts.
We really put our asses on the line.
Say it loud.
Yeah, I mean, we thought we knew what we were doing,
Yeah.
but that's sort of the visual effects industry anyway. You go into a production meeting, and they go, well, we want to do this. And you go, oh, yeah, I can do that. And you come out and talk to your crew. How the hell are we going to do that? I don't know how to do that.
So one of the things that I've been told, and maybe I've been told wrong, so maybe I'll be wrong for a fourth time.
You're getting paranoid now.
I know. So the idea was, you'll notice that there's two tape decks, or what looks like tape decks on here. And the idea was to be able to record the information coming off of the motors, going into the into the icebox.
Not so much of the Star Wars.
No, okay. But what I've been told.
At the same time as Star Wars.
See, one of the great things about
Well, hang on a second. I have proof that there was at least
Oh, there was,
an
yeah,
attempt.
what was it? I remember that. There was a tape recorder that you used.
We had one of these separate that could. We had one of these decks separate that we could plug the Star Wars motion control into and that record the moves from the day. Before that, their only option was to leave the machine on until you didn't want that shot anymore. As soon as you turned it off, the memory of that move was gone.
that's why we left it on all the time.
Yeah, and I leave it on all the time. Couldn't ever lose power, couldn't turn it off.
You can never really trust those tapes.
And so the idea was,
These tapes were not, these tapes were not the best thing.
That was my mixtape.
this one actually says trench 16 on it. But here's
That's my mixtape.
Here's the joke that I've been making this entire time we've had this on display, is that you'll notice that they say Jaws and Jaws 2. And that's not necessarily a reference to Steven Spielberg's film Before Close Encounters. Jaws, it's the fact that the machine had a tendency to eat the tapes. And so it was not very reliable. You could not store the information and go back to it days later, which really made the idea of being able to do a test pass on black and white film that could be developed immediately all the more imperative, so that you could make sure that you got all of the elements on black and white, and then you commit to color, and we'll have a reasonable chance that once it went through optical, it was going to work.
Once I got a good black and white test, I was convinced I could shoot the color, and then I would shoot the color, and then move on to the other. And in fact, because of the black and white test, and because of that process, we didn't have any reshoots. I don't believe that any shots were reshot for Star Wars.
Okay, hang on a second.
His shot.
I'm going to introduce
You
Doug.
did that. You did that.
So that's right. Doug Smith worked with and part of Doug's task was to operate essentially the Dykstra Flex control panel, much like we see here. But you were about to say?
Oh yeah, well there was one shot, And when the crew went to Guatemala to shoot the jungle material, I was sort of left in charge of trying to keep everything going on the stage. And somehow, editorial lost one of the natives. And so that's the reason it had to be reshot. Because
it was their fault.
It was their fault. So, yes, I come at this from a completely different position. I was 20 years old when I got hired. So I was next to an animator named Pete Coran. I was the youngest person on the crew. So everybody else was an adult as far as I was concerned.
Right.
Yes. Right. So we're still in that relationship, so you have to understand that.
I was very lucky to find you as an assistant.
Well, thank you very much. I started from... So my history is I had an intense interest in still photography, but I had no motion picture experience or shooting on any stage or something. So this seemed like a kind of wonderland to me. I had met a few people before at
Just be careful about what we reveal here.
Yes. my brother, so this is the connection. My brother worked with John and a series of people before on silent running, drama and string, and Doug Trumbull. So when I was in high school, I had gone to the Trumbull facility, Noga Park, and I thought this was the coolest place ever, and I want to work in a place like that. So that's how I ended up sort of like banging my way into the door. And I was early enough where the building was completely empty, and everybody there had a specific job. If I knew how to do anything like woodworking or anything, I would have ended up in a model shop. But I didn't. I ended up being just a gopher. But I made myself available to Richard, and as the equipment started getting finished, I was an extra pair of hands that had an interest in doing this. And this was before usable video was available. That's why we did the black and white tests. It was before like endoscopes. That's why this was considered an ultra small camera. So this is before mechanical robots or machine robots that are used in the auto industry. So this was all like pretty fresh ideas. And I had none of the background these guys did. So I was just learning about, relearning like some basics on photography. Richard happens to have been a rock and roll album cover kind of photographer. He did a lot of like videos at the time. Well, they wouldn't be called videos, but anyway. So really well-known groups Richard photographed.
So yeah, if go home, the theme to Hawaii Five-0, the Venture, da-na-na-na-na-na, you'll see a video out in the desert where these guys are in the middle of nowhere, and they're just playing their instruments and they're jamming, and the camera's zooming in. He shot it. He edited it.
One day.
In one day.
$500.
Including your salary?
Probably.
Yeah, wow. Oof.
So I went on a long journey of learning about this stuff, and this was my job was job was sort of jack of all trades. We were just a couple of guys. We didn't even have a big crew. We would do all the lighting and set these shots up, and even when we were working with George Lucas for a week on stage, because he wanted to know what was going on, it was just like 3 of us on stage doing this stuff. So now all the crews are much bigger because everything's much more complicated. And part of my job was to help Richard with the slow motion aspect of this equipment running. It would take so long to get from the start point to the end point that he needed some sort of memory guides to where he wanted to be in the move. So I was just helping out by calling out frame numbers, and he knew where he had to be at certain frame numbers. And then he developed this skill for recording things at ultra slow motion. So he could probably earn money being the slow motion guy at some public space because he can move super slow. So that was it. I learned a huge amount doing that because I started from zero. Richard had to teach me how to load the camera, and all the electronics. I was just the recipient of these finished things, and I can appreciate it now and understand the rules about Moore's Law and how actually fortunate Star Wars was when the memory chips actually coincided with the ability to afford to pay for the memory chips happened at just the right time for these machines to be built. So it was a combination of technology and reality coming together.
And what? So let's have John give us, you want to talk a little bit about blue screen? One of the things that was critical is we were making these shots with multiple ships in them, and rather than recording all of the ships on separate passes within the camera, we were shooting individual elements, processing it, and then combining it in an optical printer. In order for that to happen, we had to be able to extract masks. And the masks were generated by putting a background that would be a consistent color behind the subject. And we chose to use blue because blue was probably, because blue isn't used in flesh tones, but that's another story altogether. We used blue, and Jonathan was tasked with coming up with the best blue that we could come up with so that we would have very saturated color in the film, which resulted in very opaque and well-defined masks, which allow us to put these shots with 10 and 12 ships in them together without looking like they were duplicated.
Yeah. Hello, is there some?
Yep. Project.
Okay. Blue screen, let's see, the fundamental conception of how blue screen works. If you've ever done much photography, you've noticed that your negative, if you were to make a contact print of your negative, and then take the negative and lay it over that contact print, everything goes black. That's because the positive and negative elements cancel each other out. And so with color film, you've got 3 color records. So you've got 3 negatives and 3 positives. So you can manipulate those 6 pieces to produce a map. And using blue screen meant that it's at the opposite end of the spectrum from red. So if you took a red image and a blue image, the blue screen would appear as either transparent or opaque. So you combine the red negative with the blue positive, you can extract the map. Basically, it's that simple, it's that simple.
But blue screen technology is was not invented for Star Wars. In fact, it doesn't even go back. It goes back even further than when I ask people, students,
Blue screen.
go. When was it invented? People say, oh, the Technicolor era. Gone with the Wind.
It was the Technicolor era.
But it goes back.
One of the first instances of a color map was a production that shot in Ireland that was supposed to be set in England. But it was after the revolution in Ireland. And in the scene was a pillar box, a postal box, which in England are all painted red. After the revolution, Irish painted theirs green. And so there was a green mailbox in a shot that was supposed to be in England, but it was shot on Technicolor. So the Technicolor people said, no, we've got red, green, and blue elements, and they generated a map from the mailbox and switched it from green to red. That was probably the first instance of a map.
Of fixing it in post.
Yeah, fixing the post.
Yeah, fixing it in post. Yeah, absolutely.
But it goes back even earlier that in the black and white days, the Dunning process.
The Dunning
Let's
process.
not get into that.
Well, but it improved.
Blue screen was the only way to do this movie, and I had to convince John of this.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to do it front back and front like
Yeah,
that.
we knew we had to put in strike guys.
And front like that would produce a map that would be the same as the front one. So we got that, and we agreed. I have done some tests in the mid-60s on blue screen. And so I was convinced that this was going to be the way to go. And the beauty of blue screen is that when the model blurs this way, it has a blurry edge. And the blue screen will maintain that blurred edge the same way in the map that the original had. So that's kind of the reason with blue screen.
Okay, so blue
But I mean,
screen.
sorry, not getting too technical about it.
The blue screen aspect of it, and the thing that I think is important that John contributed to the advancement of the use of blue screen is the selection of the color in terms of its bandwidth and the ability to extract a more precise map, a more concise map and precise map based on the colors we used. And we used neon and fluorescent tubes with the proper phosphors in them to make a very narrow bandwidth blue light, which exposed the negative only in the blue layer, or mostly in the blue layer. We had less problems with spill because our blue wasn't a broad spectrum blue, which was very narrow bandwidth. And that was phosphor research, right, John?
But what hasn't been explained is that before it was decided that we would shoot these elements on blue screen and with this wonderful motion control camera, the earlier concept, before J.D. got involved, was evidently Lucas felt that we could black out a large stage, address some stage hands in black, and they would carry the miniature and they would run around on the stage. With sparklers. So you can see that George was a little nonplussed when J.D. said, "No, I don't think we can do it quite that way, George."
Well, that was a dumb idea. And it showed itself to be.
Yeah.
Well, the very smartest idea that George had was that while he gave up many of his points in the movie itself in order to get it finished, he hung on to absolutely all of the product. All of the minutes, all of the toys, all of the bed sheets and the cookie jars, all of that, he had to get a license from George. And so the bulk of his fortune was actually made off of the
Why don't you talk a little bit about the models as well, since you were involved in the model making. You were in the model shop as well.
Yes, I was. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. These guys are actually quite clever. We've heard about the stepper motors that the motion control is running on. There's actually stepper motors inside the X-Wing because, if you remember, the X-Wing's wings would open and close, and so that requires a stepper motor.
Actually, I'm just going to move it on.
Okay, just wanted to let you know, John, so you can
No, it's not that good a model. The guy who built the model was not that good.
These are actually,
This is not an original model.
this is not an original model, but it's remarkably good. It is extremely good. That is the Millennium Falcon. It's popularly thought that we built these entirely using parts from model kits. And we did use a lot of model kits. But we also had the little injection molding machine. So we could take moldings, casts, make molds of individual elements and then reproduce them by the hundreds, which we did. This is an incredibly beautiful issue from Millennium Falcon. What it lacks is the actual one on the shoot. We did not know that we would be, screen credits would be on the screen. That we would have screen credits at all, the people who were building the miniatures. But we were determined that we would get our names on the screen. So in Linkerset, all over the Millennium Falcon, our names in that type too small for the camera to see.
So, John?
We also, of course, I mentioned that George kept the rights to the toys. He went to Mattel Toys and he said, I'm going to make this movie and there'll be a lot of potential for toys, miniatures of the ships, action figures of the thing. And he had an interview with the vice president of Mattel who heard him out, and then he said, the vice president said, look, Mr. Lucas, I don't think you realize that it takes 2 to 3 years for us to design the toolings and machine the toolings, and by the time we put these things on the market, your movie will be long gone and forgotten. Here we are today, half a century later.
So, John,
Yeah.
one of the things I think that's important to think about with regard to the models themselves, these miniatures were made at a fairly small scale. Traditional visual effects or special effects, whatever you want to call it, trick photography was the term at that time, used large models because they needed, one, to carry depth of field, and bigger models have a better chance of doing that based on optics, which we won't go into. But we were stuck with the constraint of the space that we had to work in, and the models had to go from far away to right by camera. And they had to have enough distance in order for that to look like, well, for the shot to be long enough and for the speed to be appropriate. And to a certain extent, that dictated how small models ended up being. And it was also dictated by the scale of the stages we had to work on. So there's a lot of components that go into the thought process that dictates what these models are and the scales that they exist in. But that was the idea of time, money, and practicality was an important part of it. And I think that's one of the things that applies to all the stuff that we did on the Star Wars work at ILM at that time.
Well, larger models would have taken a lot more time to shoot.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that time, so.
There's one
Smaller model.
There's one miniature that's note here. We realized in the workshop that the Dykstra effects was a key component and that it was a game changer. And I determined that it should be memorialized in the movie. And in the Death Star docking bay scene, when the Millennium Falcon is being trapped, being in, right at the very top of the image is a miniature of the Dykstra effects on its track, hanging upside down, shooting the scene. It only exists for just a couple of frames when you see the movie, because that take had a negative scratch in it, so they cropped it out.
There you go.
So, John here is sort of, you grew up with Star Wars, and then you were visual effects supervisor on the prequels, co-developer of Photoshop. So you sort of bridged, but you started off with motion control, started off working with systems like this. So you're sort of the connective tissue between Star Wars and today, especially with the work that you're doing on the newer shows. So can you talk to us a little bit about just the legacy of this, how this changed filmmaking, really, because it's not just visual effects, it's filmmaking and storytelling.
Well, yeah, as has been mentioned before, I mean, this is a pretty remarkable piece of equipment, and this had a very profound impact on how visual effects were done. Both, this kind of thing, shooting miniatures, to be able to get this more fluid and natural movement. It didn't feel locked off and stilted. It had a much more organic feel to it. But also, this made its way to sets. And you've seen films like Back to the Future 2 and 3, where Michael J. Fox is playing 4 roles in one shot while the camera's dollying around and moving. That's only really possible because of equipment like this, where we could record what we were doing and play it back with the actor in different places in frame, split them all together and make them all look like the different passes fit perfectly. And that tech is still in use today. I'm working on something right now where we're going to be shooting a bunch of motion control elements during the live action shoot.
Can you tell us more about that? Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. But no, even when we're doing so much work with CGI, we don't do as much work with miniatures as anyone here and a lot of other people here would like, because we're all sort of used to the tactile feel of models, and it's cool to walk in on the stage and see all this stuff set up and running. It's still valuable information that can be provided to the digital artists and CGI artists that can then be putting in the CG spaceship or the CG monster or the particle sims of the tornado that are coming, because the data that is gathered by all of this can be translated and used with CG. One question that I've been asked to ask you, John, tell us the story. Now, John Dykstra, where did the name Dykstraflex come from?
Listen, I don't really know. It just showed up on the camera when it showed up on stage. So I guess it was a conspiracy. Because I'm into conspiracy theories. I think it was, a group of people got together and got silly with Ron.
Besides, his name is Dykstra.
And now you're flexible. I didn't say the jokes would be good. Anyway, we're going to have to wrap it up. We're going to be back at 2:30.
In case you want to hear all that again.
Hey, after a few drinks, maybe the stories will change. But no, this is such a fantastic turnout. The Academy Museum is really about engaging with the people that come here, trying to impress upon you not only the history, but also to provide some inspiration potential to other people who are younger and are going to continue on with their careers. I know for me, watching this movie when I was 10 years old, seeing it probably 100 times too many, much to my parents' chagrin, and reading through Cinefex and Starlog and all of that stuff, and then getting to know all these guys professionally and personally as friends, it was incredibly inspirational. So we hope we've imparted some of that here as well, and we hope that you'll come back to the museum. Go upstairs, check out the 3rd floor. There's some miniatures from Close Encounters, as well as some miniatures from Interstellar. There are some people in this room that have worked on both of those films. And not to mention 2001, which was largely hugely influential on these guys. So check it out and enjoy. Uh-oh.
This is the first such event demonstration that the museum has put on. And I would encourage them to do more of it. So when you get home, write them an email and tell them how much you've enjoyed this particular demonstration.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for